Hi, it's me. Today we're back with another Limbus Company new ID overview. Season 5 is winding down, and so we only have one triple-odd ID to discuss in this video, that being the middle little brother Sinclair. The middle is probably my favorite faction that's new to Limbus Company, so I was really excited about him when he was revealed. His kit gave me a bit of worry, but thankfully he seems to be a very solid ID for one of my favorite teams, Envy Resonance. Another cool thing is that he's standard fare, meaning even if you don't want him right now, you will always be able to use ego shards to get him. I never recommend pulling on banners with only one thing on them anyways, so that's a big plus in my book. Now without any further ado, let's get into his kit. This is the first ID that I can confidently say benefits heavily from enemies having unbreakable coins. This is because of his passive and how it works with his variety of new status effects. Each time himself or his allies are hit by an attack, the attacker is inflicted with a Vendetta mark once per turn per identity. When a unit from the middle is hit, it inflicts 5, and otherwise it will always inflict 2. Vendetta mark is a status that stacks up to 10, makes the enemy take 2% more damage per stack from middle units, making it a nice boost in damage for the faction. It also inflicts Sibling Vengeance mark to the unit with the most of it on turn end, and while this is cool in that it can potentially make 2 enemies have the effect of Vengeance mark, I've found that more often than not both marks will be on the same target. However, when Sinclair hits an enemy who has Vendetta mark, he will consume it all and gain an equal amount of Book of Vengeance Sinclair. Book of Vengeance is a very powerful effect, granting a 1% increase to his damage per stack and stacking up to 30, but also grants additional buffs for every 10 that you have. At 10 stack, you gain 1 blunt damage up for an additional 10% damage boost. At 20, you gain 1 max speed and 1 final power to all of his skills, and at 30, you gain another 2 blunt damage up for 20% more damage. At its maximum, this effect is 60% increased blunt damage, 30% increased damage for non-blunt skills, 1 max speed, making his speed range a 4 to 7, which is pretty solid, and 1 final power to all of his skills, which is a really big buff to his consistency. And with the advent of unbreakable coins, you will probably gain a bit of extra damage over the course of a long fight just by playing, especially during boss fights where there's only a single target. Keep in mind that all of what I just mentioned is tied to his passive, so you need to have 3 Envy owned before you can start ramping up. And his support passive is just not good enough to be worth talking about until we have a lot more middle IDs, but it could be pretty helpful if you plan on running a full Zvi team but are missing Zvi Sinclair specifically. I'm going to talk about his skills in a weird order here, so just bear with me. Is It You is a 3 to 11 rolling blunt gluttony skill with 2 coins that can become a 3 to 13 if the target has enough bleed, but trust me when I say that this bleed conditional does not matter that much. In fact, none of his bleed conditionals really affect his playstyle in any way. They definitely help, but you probably won't build your team to support them. This skill also gains 1 clash power when at 45 SP, and if you're not at 45 SP, you gain 5 SP instead. SP acceleration is always great to have, and this ID is also fairly tanky, gaining 5 aggro on both his skill 1 and skill 2 just for using them, making him a decent defensive option for any team that involves bleed. And now we come to the core of this ID's kit, his defense skill. Warm Up in the East is a 5 to 13 rolling blunt envy counter with 2 coins. It does give some shield for free at combat start based on how much HP that Sinclair is missing, but the only part of this skill that actually matters is the first effect, and sadly, that's an effect that he does not gain until Uptide 4, so this ID requires some investment to be really good. Depending on your Envy Absolute Resonance, this counter can become either his skill 2 or skill 3. While this doesn't sound insanely useful, it's important to note that this is an automatic 5 Book of Vengeance if it activates due to how counters work. Also, the offense level math on counters typically results in them rolling way higher than traditional skills, especially with a large amount of offense level from Resonance. And these skills already hit really hard due to how much damage increase that Sinclair can get. At 4 plus Envy Absolute Resonance, his counter will become his skill 2. Payback with Interest is a 4 to 16 rolling blunt envy skill with 3 coins that can become a 4 to 19 if the target has enough bleed. It also grants a bunch of offense level based on your resonance, doubling the effect if it's Absolute Resonance, and the third coin also deals 20% more damage if you have 3 plus Envy Resonance, which is just really good. Realistically, it isn't too hard to get 4 Envy Resonance to use this skill as a counter, thanks to how many other IDs like Envy Resonance specifically. This is definitely the skill you should most often trigger with this counter, and it actually works really well for clashing and dealing damage otherwise as well. Of course, it isn't the best skill he has. Write 'em All Down is a 5 to 17 rolling blunt envy skill with 3 coins that can become up to a 5 to 23 if the target has enough bleed. This skill is activated as his counter with 6+ envy absolute resonance, which is pretty demanding to do, but it's definitely worth it with just how hard it actually hits. The skill has an additional 1% damage bonus for every Book of Vengeance on Sinclair, on top of the increasing offense level from resonance. Tying an additional damage conditional to a status effect that already massively increases his damage is very based and true, and he also gets 15% more damage on the last coin for every 10 Book of Vengeance. Yeah, if you couldn't tell, this skill hits absurdly hard, especially as a counter. It also just gains more damage on the last hit from resonance. Even when not using it as a counter, this skill deals a ridiculous amount of damage once he's fully ramped up. Sadly, at time of release, Sinclair doesn't have a great lineup of ego that this ID would really want to use. On the plus side, this is the first ID who can pretty easily gain additional attack weight on his own Hexnail, an ego that inflicts a ton of useful debuffs like Clash Power Down and Bind, and also allows him to actually inflict bleed count through nails. He also makes great use of the passive. Getting hit to trigger his counter will probably result in him getting negative effects, which will then boost his Clash Power, Defense Skill Power, and give some protection. Defense Power Up does affect the power of counters, so that will be a really good passive for him to proc early into a fight if you can. The other ego I recommend for him is Cavernous Wailing. He doesn't contribute to it at all, but him being a resonance-based ID means that gaining the attack weight on it shouldn't be too difficult, and the additional shield it provides helps to offset the amount of attacks your team is going to take if your goal is to use a bunch of counters. It also gives some free protection from its passive, which will help his survivability even more. Aside from those two, any blunt ego that you can feel is going to be really nice thanks to the massive damage bonus that they can gain due to Book of Vengeance. His best blunt AoE right now is unironically Cavernous Wailing, but stuff like 9-2 and Impending Day can both benefit from it. Your priority when building a team around this ID should be to trigger Envy Resonance as often as possible. While you may be making some concessions in terms of bleed, there is a lot of synergy to be found here. It should come as no surprise that the other 3 IDs who benefit the most from Envy Resonance, being Middle Don Quixote, Middle Merceau, and Pequod Heathcliff, all pair incredibly nicely with him. Not only do they all also gain bonuses from it, but they also have incidental synergies. Merceau provides Envy Power Up and Envy Damage Up to his adjacent allies with his skill 2, and since all 4 of these IDs have the same speed range, that will usually be them, and his skill 3 can inflict Envy Fragility against enemies with Vengeance Mark. He also provides free SP for the middle allies, and his access to Electric Screaming gives him a good way to provide additional offense level up and defense level up to his allies through Envy Resonance. Middle Dawn is just an incredibly solid unit who also uses her skill 3 as her counter with Envy Absolute Resonance, but she has a great Envy AoE skill in Electric Screaming that you will pretty much always be able to take advantage of. And Pequod Heathcliff both gains damage from being hit, and every time an ally gets hit, he gains more offense level up. He's also the only one to directly gain coin power from Envy Resonance, which should not be hard to activate, and Binds grants a ton of offense level up and defense level up to all allies who are a part of the highest resonance, which is always really nice in a team like this. He's also the only one of them who can naturally inflict bleed count. Since this is a resonance-based ID, you also gain a lot from bringing Pequod Ishmael. Since you're focusing on using Envy skills as often as possible, it's pretty likely that you won't build up your other affinities as quickly as in other teams. Assist Attack allows you to use more non-Envy skills to build up your other resources, and Ishmael having an Envy skill 1 and applying bonus offense level up with her skill 2 makes her a great support for units like this. Other bleed IDs that work particularly well are the new Kurakumo IDs if you would rather build for bleed. When paired with Ishmael, the fact that their coins become unbreakable does lead to some instances where they still take damage, while also dealing some back, which helps to build up Vendetta mark on enemies. Princess of La Mancha Land Rodian gets bonus points from her Envy skill, giving allies attack power up and her ability to inflict bleed count. Her access to Hexnail is also great as it's a healing ego that becomes stronger with Envy Resonance specifically. And the hybrid bleed and charge unit in Red Eyes and Penitence Ryoshu is a crazy good ally due to her having an Envy skill 1 and an Envy counter. She's a crazy powerful defensive attacker who can even heal her allies without relying on ego, though she is unfortunately locked to Walpurgisnacht. And speaking of charge, since the Electric Screamings are both charge and Envy, any team focusing on Envy Resonance will have a lot of synergy with charge IDs. I would say that Middle Merceau is optimal to pair with this ID. If you lose one member of the middle, I would say it should be Dawn, to be honest. But you can also bring either Rhino or W Corp Merceau if you want to lean heavier into a charge setup. Both of the multi-crack IDs have great synergy here, inflicting both Blunt Fragility and Envy Fragility respectively. They also both have access to Charge Ego to boost their damage, and Multi-Crack Faust is just one of the best damage dealers in the game still. She also has Hex Nail, which inflicts Envy Fragility, and Nails to help Sinclair even more. And W Otis is a really high clashing ID who supports other charge IDs really well, and granting charge barrier to the IDs from the middle helps to balance out the damage they are taking before using their counters. She also has access to Dimension Shredder, the most powerful AoE Envy Ego in the game, that becomes even stronger with Envy Resonance. And lastly, this ID has great synergy with the She IDs of all things. They all want to be on low HP, and getting them hit will contribute to Vendetta mark. They all have an Envy skill for Resonance, with Ishmael even having an Envy counter, and Sinclair gains aggro to help redirect attacks from them once they reach low HP, helping to keep them alive more often. It really does seem like the She will get tons of support, but never an actual good She ID. Oh yeah, and She Ishmael's support passive even increases the power of counter skills, which is great for a team like this. And that's about all I have to say about middle Sinclair. I really like this ID, it's super satisfying to use him well, and it's always felt great when an ID actually has a reason to use its defense skill. I hope you found this helpful or interesting, and would appreciate if you liked and subscribed because it helps me out a lot. Let me know what you think of this ID in the comments, and if you want to try him out before getting him, I have him in my company fully equipped. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I hope to see you again soon.